Welcome to Pages and Partners, a Muncie Public Library podcast. Discover the library through our history, buildings, staff, programs, and partnerships. Join us as we explore what makes Muncie Public Library an important part of our community.
Thank you for joining us for Pages and Partners, a Muncie Public Library podcast. I'm Gabby Sandefer, Program Supervisor of Great Achievers at Muncie Public Library, and my guest is author and journalist Keith Roysdon. We're going to chat today about Keith's writing process, his books, both nonfiction and fiction, and what it's like to tell stories rooted in Muncie history. Keith, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, well, I am really excited to get talking about this. So to get things started off with a little background, can you tell us about yourself and how you got into writing books?
You know, I wanted to be a lawyer, and that would have been probably a much more fruitful profession. But instead, when I was in high school at Cowan High School, south of Muncie, I kind of fell into the whole newspaper writing thing by filling in one week for another student who was on the newspaper and yearbook staff. She wasn't able to make a deadline to write an article for the Muncie Evening Press, which was the, obviously, evening paper at that time. And I did, and I wrote about what high school students in the area do on a typical night out. And it had, you know, the standard go to Emmons Auditorium for a concert, go to a movie. And I also included such forbidden things as, you know, get some beer and drive around in the country. And my school system was incensed. But based on that, the newspaper offered me a regular column writing. So that kind of derailed my plans. I couldn't have hacked all the law school anyway. But so the newspaper offered me a column, and when I started at Ball State, I continued to write for them, and I wrote for them all through college and after, and then started full time.
That's awesome.
And I actually took a buyout in 2019. They offered it. I thought I should probably take it because the newspaper business being what it is. Mm-hmm. So in the early years, I wrote about everything, you know, features and news stories and entertainment, a lot of entertainment. I reviewed live music, live stage, and movies. And from 1989 on, I covered government and politics, which in Muncie there is a lot to write about. In 2016, I broke the news of the FBI investigation into the city of Muncie. Yeah. I was the person who wrote about that for the Star Press. I didn't realize
you were the one, because I was in college during that time, and I remember that article break. I didn't realize that was you who broke it.
I'd written a number of series of stories over the years about corruption and officials being charged and things like that. And that one started off in the most innocuous manner because I got contacted by a guy who was upset that his flea market that he had a booth at was closing. And the building was being sold. And he was upset. I mean, most people have that element of self-interest. They want to know, why is this affecting me? And so I started making calls, and as I'm talking to somebody else, he mentions, and he was the former owner of the building, he mentions, by the way, the feds are looking into this too. And I'm like, oh.
Would have perked my ears up. I would have been like, the feds?
He said the FBI, because he was dying from cancer, and he kind of felt like he had nothing to lose. So I started, and it was a 3-year process that ultimately, after I took the buyout, resulted in the mayor of Muncie pleading guilty to charges and a lot of other people. But it was a very interesting, colorful time.
That's
and not
incredible.
A bad way to wrap up my newspaper career. I came back later and freelanced some for them, like during COVID. I freelanced for them. But since 2019, I've been writing books and writing numerous articles and short stories and things like that. Much of it kind of crime, thriller type oriented fiction.
Right up my alley. I am a thriller girl through and through. I love thrillers. I love true crime. I love all of that. And so that's really fascinating. I didn't realize you were the one who wrote that article, because that was hot news at Ball State. If you went to Ball State during that time, you knew about that. Everyone did. So that's incredible. What a way to end your journalism too, on such a bang.
It was a good time. There was always something good to write, and that kind of cliche journalism thing where I would go secretively meet with someone who wanted to give me information and all that kind of stuff. So it was fun. I sat in a church parking lot in a guy's car one night at 11 p.m. as he's telling me, oh, you should know about this and you should know about that. So
that's so. Oh my gosh, that's amazing. I love that. That is so I don't know, like journalism beat, I gotta go and chase the story.
It's fun.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that. So now that we've learned a bit about your history, shifting into the books and things like that, I'm sure that the journalism helps lend to this, but a lot of your books focus on true stories that are from Muncie. How do you go about finding and researching these stories? Because as you've said, there is a lot to talk about.
There is. Douglas Walker and I, we were coworkers and frequent collaborators at the Star Press newspaper. And in 2015, it was the 150th anniversary of the city of Muncie. So the staff wrote a bunch of articles, very history-oriented articles. I wrote a history of local industry, and I wrote a history of Ball Hospital. Doug wrote a history. It had to be abbreviated because there is so much to cover. He wrote a history of crime in Muncie that touched on the days when John Dillinger used to hang out here and all that. And he got contacted by an editor at the History Press, Arcadia Publishing. They're out of South Carolina. And if you ever go into a drugstore or the Orchard Shop, gift shop, you'll see History Press books. They do a lot of tightly written, there are 35,000, 40,000 words. I cite some examples. Long forgotten restaurants in Cincinnati or such and such crime in upstate New York. And
stuff you kind of hear word of mouth only. You don't really, you have to know someone who knew someone type thing.
So they asked us if we would consider, they asked Doug if he'd consider turning his 150 years of crime into a book. And he turned to me and said, "You're willing to work on this?" And so our first one came out in 2016, the second one in 2018, the third, which was the first one that focused only on one crime, came out during the pandemic. It was the West Side Park murders.
Yes, and there's actually a famous Indiana podcast that just covered that too.
That people started contacting me when that came out and said, "Oh, you need to listen to this."
They reference you in it and stuff. So my mom is a big fan of Crime Junkies. I'll shout them out. They're an Indiana-based podcast too, which is really neat. And they actually covered this, and it was cool because you were one of their primary sources for that. You and what was your partner's name?
Douglas Walker.
Douglas, yeah, you were one of their primary sources. They kept referencing your book and being like, "This book is awesome." So,
well, that's good to hear. Thank you. Sometimes people will kind of pick over the bones of things that you published, whether it's articles or books, and don't necessarily give you a lot of credit. I was startled one day I happened to do a Google search of a particular crime and found a guy reading one of my articles in a video on YouTube. And he's just sitting here like this, and he's reading the article word for word. And I'm sure he's racking up pretty good views on YouTube. But so it's kind of strange. And I'm sure he probably said our names or something, but it was a strange thing to see your work just in somebody else's hands.
Oh, yeah.
But that was the third book. We did one other book that came out in 2023, which was nothing but cold cases, unsolved murders. And during the course of 10 years, we had done a series for the Star Press, and we found more than 30 cold cases, unsolved murders in Muncie and Delaware County, and just a little sliver land around Delaware County, dating back to, we wrote about some going back to the 1950s and 1960s.
Wow.
So there was plenty of material for a book, unfortunately. And that book came out in 2023.
I remember when that book came out, because working at the library, we had you come in and do some stuff.
And spoke, yeah.
Wow. For like such a small area in the, grand scheme of cities and stuff, to have that many cold cases is insane.
It's kind of startling.
Yeah.
And we would find those in a kind of a roundabout way. The West Side Park murders, he and I first wrote about in 1997.
Uh-huh.
It was, the murders were in 1985, and he wasn't here yet in Muncie, and I wasn't writing about that kind of story. But so in 97, we did a thing, and then we did more every anniversary. And in 2010, we kicked off this whole series, Cold Case Muncie, by writing about the West Side Park case, which was 2 teenagers who were killed sitting in a car in West Side Park. And we didn't know at the time, but that attracted enough attention. The Muncie Police Department turned to Nathan Sloan, who's now the police chief. But Nathan was an investigator at the time, and Muncie police have, since 1985, had a pretty standard practice of some promising young investigator. They've said, we want you to look at this room full of files and see if anything occurs to you. And what Sloan did in the few years following 2010 was he interviewed people who had never been spoken before by police, and he arrived at a person of interest. And our book, The West Side Park Murders, is the first time that person of interest has been named.
Wow.
He's actually in prison for another completely unrelated murder.
Yeah.
So I contacted him. I sent a letter and said, here's questions, and here's a self-addressed stamped envelope if you would like to talk about why Muncie police seem to think you're their person of interest.
Giving him a
and all
chance
that. I didn't hear back from him, which is maybe not surprising.
Yeah, right.
But okay, picture yourself getting a letter saying, hey, you're a person of interest. Do you want to talk about it?
From both sides. I get sending the letter, and I also get not responding to the letter. I do, because if I got that, I'd be like, oh, okay.
Yeah. And eventually, all of this morphed into other kinds of writing. Since I took that buyout, I've written hundreds of articles for newspapers and websites and publications, and been writing fiction, a lot of short stories, and then 3 novels, that October being the most recent one. But I guess we were talking about retirement the other day. Somebody was talking about retirement, and I guess I really totally failed at retirement. I didn't but I don't know what I would be doing if I wasn't writing.
There's a lot of retired folk who share that sentiment of, it's fun. A lot of people say it's fun for like a couple months, and then you want to keep yourself busy,
I should take up some expensive hobby like golf or something, but yeah, it's kept me busy. Definitely.
That's awesome. That's really great. So,
and I didn't really answer your question because you asked about basing things in Muncie history.
Just how you find and research these things. So obviously living here, that's the first thing, is that you're interested in where you lived, where you grew up. And then, so I guess, are these stories more word of mouth that you hear and then you want to go search them? Is it like, an article you wrote a while ago that just stays in your brain that you keep thinking about?
It is word of mouth. And when we started doing the cold case stories in 2010, we started hearing from people saying, there's a woman named Beth Miller who said, my dad was killed when I was a kid, and would you consider writing about his case? And we did. There are police officers who say, I have always been bugged that I haven't been able to close this case. When we did and what a resource to have that we didn't know about, unfortunately. When we did some talks for the cold case book in 2023, this older man came up. He was in the audience, and he had a scrapbook. And he asked us specifically about a chapter that we wrote about a woman who had been killed in the 1960s. Not ever solved, of course, and really didn't get the kind of attention it should have gotten.
Yeah.
And he was one of the police investigators in this case in like 64 or 65. And he still had a scrapbook of like crime scene photos and his notes and things like that. Now, he's still thinking about this case.
Yeah.
And we find that the case with, of course, family members and friends, but police investigators also. And prosecutors. And
I've even seen like first responders and stuff that will remember, I mean, just years and years after responding to things like that. It's interesting because they always say that everyone who works in, unfortunately, the field of law enforcement has that one case that they just can't stop thinking about. So I think that's really crazy that he had this whole scrapbook that he had kept for years and years and years.
Yeah, and of course, it would have been great if we'd known that before we finished the book. But I always say I don't know if it's possible for people to get closure, to really get closure. The West Side case in particular affected so many people, and it was like touching an exposed wound sometimes.
Yeah.
When we wrote about West Side for the articles and also before the book, we contacted the parents first and said, we just want to let you know that we're thinking about doing this. We probably will do it. What do you think? And Kimberly's dad, who was a local doctor, had previously with the articles had said, I'll give you photos and all kinds of stuff, and I'll let you interview me. And so with Ethan's father, I called him in April, the minute we had a signed contract to do this book, and said, I just want to let you know we're going to work on this. And the luxury of working on a book as opposed to a newspaper article, I said, I'll call you back. And I called him back. This was April 1st. I called him back in November because I said, I want to give you some time to think about it and whether you would like to be interviewed. And so he talked to his wife. When I talked to him again in November, he said, I don't think we want to be interviewed, but he reacts like I think I would react. Yeah. I have a 25-year-old son, and he still carries his son's driver's license in his wallet. I mean, that's carrying around a piece of this tragic history is something I think a lot of parents and sisters and brothers and children can relate to.
Well, and it's one of those things in the natural course of, human existence, you're supposed to bury your parents, that's how the world works. And I can't imagine, I work with children. And so, my hope is that all of these children live beyond me and, create these big, beautiful lives. And the idea of one being halted like that is just, I can understand not wanting to reopen that wound. I can understand being like, we appreciate that you're getting the story out there and that you're sharing it, but like we can't, emotionally keep, you said it's raw, it's a wound, it's just, you keep poking it and stuff. It makes that healing really difficult. So yeah, I love that you use those firsthand sources too for your research, because it's easy to speak on a situation. It's a lot more heartfelt and honest to give someone a microphone so that they can speak on their experience. I think that's an extremely powerful thing that I'm noticing with your research is you're always very like experience led. Those people, what did they experience?
Unfortunately, there are cases that there was no family that we could find, no survivors that we could find. We found out about some cases in a kind of an odd manner, in that the newspapers' archives, what people refer to sometimes as the morgue, but we just call it the library, are all in the hands of Ball State University now. They're digitizing articles going back to the 50s.
Yeah.
This is old, as unfortunate as that is, a lot of things from before then didn't survive.
Yeah.
So Ball State is digitizing.
Well, and that's one of the reasons that they're digitizing it,
Yeah.
is so we don't have to worry about it falling apart.
So one way that we knew that we could identify cases that we could write about is when we, in like the 2000s, 2010s, we would go into our newspaper library, and they had just a room full of manila envelope type folders, and they have like shelves that are murder / Johnson Sam, or murder / Roysdon Keith, and some of them would be incredibly thick and stuffed with stories because they had trial coverage, like when somebody had been arrested and all that, but it was the very thin ones where there was an initial story about someone being killed, and maybe there would be a story a year later saying still no new leads on this. Those are the ones we knew were unsolved. And we would use that as a launching pad to then start contacting people and say, hey, do you know anything about this?
And that's incredible to me because, getting answers for stories, because, every life's important. Every story is important to tell. And, it's like you said earlier, you may not get closure, but you can at least get answers. And I think that's important for people. So, and just honoring the fact that happened to a person, right? Like honoring their history and their story and not letting them just be another number or statistic. That's a person who had a family, who had, a life. So thank you for sharing that. That's really fascinating. I didn't realize that Ball State was digitizing everything too.
And hopefully they're making progress. They've had them for a while, but I mean, it's a lot of paper.
Oh yeah.
It is a lot of paper.
I can't imagine. I know Sarah at Carnegie has been working on, they were digitizing.
They might be county court records.
Yeah, and then there's also like a journal. This guy's like journals that they've been working on digitizing too. So it's just it's a very tedious process, but it's a very important process.
Karen Winger was the Delaware County clerk and she's the one who made the decision to ask Muncie Public Library if they wanted to digitize court records. And I'll never forget, Karen, all the boxes were just like stacked up, those big cardboard banker's boxes stacked up in the basement of the county building. And she said, waved me over and said, look at this. And she'd obviously found this already, but it was an arrest warrant for John Dillinger.
Oh, wow.
That was in there. I mean, all these things, a lot of it is the day-to-day process of people living and having to go to court and be in charge of the crime or suing their spouse or their landlord or whatever. But then you have these, oh wow, John Dillinger. So,
that's crazy. Not the arrest. I like that she just like pulled that out too. Like, hey, let me show you something.
Yeah.
So, we've talked about all of these stories that you have read about, that you have experienced researching and interviewing folks for. Was there one story that's really stuck with you, something especially interesting or surprising or even just plain weird, just something that really, sticks with you when you think about all these different stories you've heard?
I mentioned this already, so I won't go into it at great length again, but really the West Side Park case has stuck with people so thoroughly, and it's stuck with me. But there are others that some of them have stuck with a very select couple of people. And now I think about those because for the cold case book, we talked to a long-time local county police investigator named Jerry Cook. And I've known him for many, many years, and he's retired now. And he remembered a case from the 1990s. I'm pretty sure it was the 90s. And I'm sorry, he said it was a homicide in a cold case they're certain, but they could never prove that it was even a murder, because, and this, I tell the story in the book. Police got reports from somebody's roommate or something, noting that he had not been around. He'd been gone for a few days. So they kind of tracked him back, and they found a bar that he had spent some time in. And people at the bar said, oh, yeah, he left with a guy on such and such night. And he hasn't been back in. We don't know where he is or what happened to him. And, oh, no, by the way, his car is like sitting out front, so like he never came back and got his car. And Jerry Cook, the investigator, is convinced that the person that this man left with killed him.
Yeah, well, especially if his car is still there.
His car is there, and his roommate says he never showed up. But I have a body, don't have a lot of information about it. So I mean, that's the kind of thing that sticks with people, but it's like one that probably almost nobody remembers.
Wow.
But it
well,
is.
And
it is
that,
chilling.
I bet the bartender thinks about that too. They think about that, and they're just like, what happened? Mm-hmm. If you hear that was the phone at the Centennial Library, if you hear that in the background. So, well, that's extremely fascinating. So you have got a new fiction book coming out that our lovely Carnegie building manager also did the illustration for, Sarah. This book is called That October, and it dropped on June 1st. So can you tell us what it is about, what the writing process was for a fiction book? You have tended to write more, investigative journal, that type of, and this is a complete fiction book. So was the process different for writing this one?
It was a little bit in that I wrote a couple of novels before I wrote this one, and one got some really good response, and the second one is too long, too many characters, too many plots. Set in 1948, Harry Truman shows up at the end. And,
okay, I kind of love that though.
And it's called Ghost Show.
Yeah.
And it was inspired by a friend of mine took photos in the Rivoli Theater downtown in Muncie before it was torn down in the late 1980s. And there was a ticket that he found on the floor during the demolition, and was for a ghost show or spook show in June of 1948. And
wow.
I didn't really know what those were. And I did research and found out that ghost shows or spook shows were traveling magic shows with a kind of a horror or monster element to them. And they were started in the late 1800s, and they were pretty much gone by the 1970s. But in 1948, it was really, it was a big thing. And they would travel from town to town, and they would do, it was frequently built around a magician, and he would do a magic act. But instead of making a glitzy kind of Las Vegas-y magic act, they did this kind of horror thing where they would, saw a woman in half, but it was supposed to be, killing somebody. And they would have guys in masks, monster masks, come down into the audience, and they would paint like cardboard skeletons and skulls and things with phosphorescent paint, and they would fly them out on strings over the audience's
How do we bring
head.
these back?
Oh, I know.
How do we bring these back?
And there are a few people, if you look around for spook shows or ghost shows, there are a few people who have revived that.
Oh, I need to go audition for one of these. I would body that. I would kill as a spook show person. Oh, that's so fun.
I fell in love with the idea. And so that prompted me. I wanted to write a book about my mom's family. They came up here from Tennessee in the 1940s, and like their dad and the four oldest girls came up here, and they got jobs in factories like the ball canning jar factory and various places, and to make a living to bring the mom and the younger kids up from Tennessee, and they did. but I wanted to write a sibling story. I'm talking a lot about a book that probably nobody ever will read because there's too much. It's just too much. So I put a lot of fiction into the story about their family, with consciousness raising and coming of age for the youngest siblings, and everything from a serial killer to an actual ghost in the Rivoli Theater, which is something that was kind of suggested that there was a ghost in the Rivoli Theater. And by the time I had written my first book, Seven Angels, and wrote Ghost Show, I felt pretty confident that I was on the right track as far as I heavily outline. I think the best thing that writers can do is really service their characters, don't bring people in, and don't really give them a lot to do. So
thank you. As a reader, thank you. I'm always like, why did this person come in? If they're going to say 5 words and leave, just make someone else say it at that point.
So by the time I wrote that October, and I started it in 2021 and finished it in 2023, I felt like I could tell a story, and it was inspired not really by the West Side Park stories, but something that people told me when they when I talked to them for the West Side Park book, because I like writing stories. I don't always. I like modern day stories, but I like writing stories far enough in the past that things are different. You can't just pick up a cell phone and call somebody. Mm-hmm. You got to try to figure out where they are if you're going to meet with them. And so in 1984, as the news about West Side Park was traveling, it was traveling by people calling their friends on that phone hanging on the wall in their parents' kitchen.
Oh, I loved my landline. I had a specific way I would sit in my bedroom to keep my siblings out of my room, like with the landline on. So my friends would hear me like slamming the door while my siblings were trying to get in, and my mom would be like, "Who has the phone?" So, I have lots of love for landline.
It was that kind of thing of that bond between. One of the things that I feel like I have to overcompensate for after a lifetime of newspaper writing, which has to be very factual and
concise, from what I've heard.
Concise. I had to learn to write longer and to write with more emotion. And who is more emotional than teenagers?
Oh, yeah.
So the idea that I would write about, it's like 6 teenagers, main protagonists, but really emphasis more on 4 of them. A blended family, brother and a sister, don't really know each other very well, and they're friends. And the idea that you find out while you're pushing for the police to solve this case, that the adults are like strangely lackadaisical about it. Yeah. They're not really pushing as hard as you think they ought to push. So that heightens your emotions, and then you decide you're going to Scooby-Doo it yourself, and try to find things.
That's a very like teenage mentality too. Like I remember being like, none of these adults get it.
I'm going to do this if nobody else will.
Yeah, and it's that idea of like, as a teenager, every idea I've ever had is the first time someone's had this idea. Right. I am the first person to ever, with my friends, go search something out in my town. Mm-hmm. But that is an idea that we can all relate to, I feel like, because we were all teenagers that had that idea once. I remember thinking that I knew absolutely everything. I knew how the world worked. I knew all of it. And then you get a little older and you realize no one really knows what's going on.
And nobody wanted to hear what I had to say about this or that or something. Oh, my God. But it all came from that idea of that phone on the wall and people calling each other and saying, oh, my God, did you hear what happened?
Yeah, I love that. Well, in that, with human beings still, I feel like exists so well. Like now it's just done with texting or with a screenshot or, did you see this? Did you hear this? But I like that a lot. I love the cover to me is so reminiscent of like Stranger Things, kids on bikes, and I love that.
Sarah did an incredible job, and I kind of knew what I wanted, and I couldn't pull it off, obviously. I had noticed on Sarah's Facebook page a comic book cover she had done a few years ago.
Oh, yeah.
So I wanted an X-Men style pose, like a group of young people who were kind of in a line or in a V or something like that. So I literally, it's like the worst, stupidest drawing ever. I drew some stick figures and I said, maybe you could assemble them this way. And I sent her some photographs of the actors who I kind of had in my head as I was writing it. And I was dumbfounded with what I was so anxious and eager to see it. And she sent me like the black and white line drawing at some point. And I was just absolutely dumbfounded. Before this even happened, my friend Joel Blocker, who did the talks with me last year here in Muncie, had said, we really ought to self-publish it. And I really hadn't tried to sell it to anybody. I hadn't tried to query any agents or publishers or anything like that. And she said she had self-published one of her books. She said, I had more control over what I wanted to do and the timing of it, and I made some money. And she said, you really need to do this. So we pulled it together, and over the course of a few weeks and few months, and then Sarah sending me this art, sent it to me and Jill, that is just dumbfoundingly gorgeous. So I couldn't have been better.
That's awesome.
I mean, just absolutely wonderful.
That's so cool. I just love hearing about your process and stuff. And, speaking of that process, so you've kind of switched, with nonfiction and fiction. Are there any, you kind of briefly touched on some of those challenges in those leaps. Is there any main challenge you can think of? You talked about more emotionality, and you said writing more in length have been some of the bigger challenges. Are there any other ones you can think of? It's been a couple of years since I've actually worked on a novel. I have written a lot of other stuff, but my challenge now is kind of getting back into that groove, but also how to do things that are innovative and not just reactive, and try to do more interesting things. I really like that you just said innovative instead of reactive.
Yeah, because you can't chase trends.
Yeah.
These are the most popular books right now. Well, by the time your book is out in a year or two or three, those aren't going to be the trends anymore.
Yeah.
But I've tied myself to a couple of trends that, if we're all still here in a year, people will recognize, and that I made two main bad guys.
Yeah.
And one is the pastor of a megachurch, and the other is an incredibly rich tech.
Oh, I have a feeling those. I have a feeling those villains are going to stick around for a little while. That's all I'm going to say.
So
those are very believable villains.
I mean, the idea that you can bring your protagonists together because of who the antagonists are is a really good idea.
Well, that's how human beings work.
Yeah,
I'm thinking of if you look at town halls, even here in Muncie, when there have been some town halls recently where you'll see people that would not be in the same room otherwise, but they are all coming together over a common feeling, a common thought, a common idea. And most of the time it's protecting where they live and protecting, I may not agree with my neighbor, but, I'll be darned if you're going to disrespect my neighbor, that type of vibe, and I feel like that's a very Muncie kind of feeling too, is that, we can tease Muncie, no one else can tease Muncie, is that idea, this is our domain. We can make jokes, we can make light, but we are proud of this area.
So the challenge for me is trying to do something that kind of advances the attitude and the mood and the thoughts and feelings that people have, and trying to do something that feels realistic, but everything I think of, it's like, okay, these things are coming to pass in real life, and what seemed like, oh, this is really outrageous and ridiculous. For example, there's a church that makes the AR-15 integral to its religion.
Oh, yeah.
And so I wanted to do that for my megachurch group. But so quickly things advance and more things happen that we would not have believed at some point a year or two ago, 10 years ago, that I feel like I want to be careful that I'm not writing something that seems as history bound as the book said in 1984.
It's like The Simpsons, how they keep predicting the future. Like you have to be careful with your pen on like what you predict. It's like, oh gosh, this could end up very, very bad.
Exactly.
I like that though. And I appreciate that as a reader, because sometimes, as much as I love reading, sometimes you will hear something that is so dated for the time that it almost takes you out for a minute. Like I was just listening to an audiobook on the way here, and they mentioned Harry Styles in it, and I was like, what am I reading? Like, and it does for a split second. You're like, Harry Styles, like that's too real world. And so it's that idea of like, you want to make it timely, but you don't want to date it too much, because you want people from, in 40 years to be able to read this and still connect with it. So I agree with that, especially as a reader. It's a very fine line to tread.
And I might still parachute out of this whole idea because I'm really afraid that, okay, am I going to write something that is overreactive and ridiculous that people laugh about, or am I going to write something that's like, man, you should have taken this a lot further, because by this point we're way past this level of outrage.
It's a fine line to go through. So for anyone who wants to check out these books, where can they find them?
Well, I'm really happy to say that October you can find signed copies in Muncie at All Yeah Comics downtown, as well as Ink Drinkers Anonymous downtown. One of the things that, with being here in Muncie for just a couple of weeks, one thing I wanted to do was to be sure to connect with the people that I know who sell books here locally. And
also, shout out to Aw Yeah Comics and Ink Drinkers. Two wonderful places.
Absolutely.
Wonderful local places that you can get comics, you can get books, you can get, I even think they have like journals, like all sorts of stuff there. So check them out if you're local. They're great. Yeah,
absolutely. And, but I encourage people to buy from people, actual real living people. But I have been happy to say that the book is available on all the big websites. It's been, and they're, like on Amazon.com, and I should make a spitting noise or something. But on Amazon.com, there are levels or there are niches, categories. And it's been like as high as 70 in a certain kind of category of, what do they call it? It's like teen crime and legal thrillers or something like that. But Powell's Books in Portland, Oregon, you can get it from them. You can get it from Barnes & Noble and bookshop.org, which is an independent supporting bookstores, so you can get them pretty much anywhere.
I think you can order online from Ink Drinkers too. So if you want to still buy local, but you're listening to this podcast from like Illinois or something, I'm pretty sure you can still order online from Ink Drinkers and stuff too if you want to support local, but you're afar.
Yeah. Absolutely. I hope that people do that.
Yes. We are all for support local. And then
and libraries.
Yes.
Libraries are, I always say libraries do a lot of society's heavy lifting. And not only making books and movies and periodicals and internet access available, but people can go there and they can get online and apply for their benefits, and they can print out a recipe, and they're this vital connection, which is even more frustrating when you hear about cuts to library funding and things like that. But the Muncie Library, I was startled to find, I think it was the West Side Park book, is available from the Chicago Public Library.
Really?
Yeah, I had no idea why.
Shout out Chicago Public Library. Yeah. Heck yeah.
I had no idea why, but I just stumbled across it at some point.
Someone might have requested it to be in their collection.
The
yeah.
But if everybody came to their library, and of course you can request, like you said, but if everybody came to their library and read any of my stuff, I'd be happy.
Yeah, and then the library is a great way too if you want to test the waters, if this is a new genre for you, before you commit to buying it. Great way to check the book out. And then if you really like Keith's stuff, you can go on to Ink Drinkers, order everything. It's a great way to kind of test the waters before you buy. So I'm really excited to check it out, especially I really want to read the new one that October, especially because some of my fifth graders might possibly like that. We'll see, though.
I was literally telling somebody yesterday, I'm afraid Sarah's cover is going to so raise expectations that I'm worried the book is not going to meet those.
I am sure it is fabulous. I can't wait to read it. You can ask Laura, I was trying to get an early copy. I was like, is there anywhere I can get this? Like, I really want to read this. So I'm very excited to read it. Do you have any advice for aspiring journalists or authors out there?
There's an incredible need for journalists right now. And I'm lucky to know some young journalists and always encourage them, because it's not an easy business. Newspaper journalism is by and large built on the backs of people who are willing to work unpaid hours. Yeah,
one of my dearest friends, he's a journalist, and he went through Ball State's program and everything, and he has written, up in Buffalo, and now he's just moved. And it is definitely, as a teacher, someone who does their role for the heart too, it is a for the heart profession for sure.
And I would encourage anybody who's studying to learn about other things too. Mm-hmm. I made a joke a little while ago about not having to know math. I went into journalism because I didn't think there would be any math. I would encourage people to find out about finance and math and architecture and construction and design and all kinds of things that you will, and law, all kinds of things that you might write about in a news article. And as far as writing other than journalism, I have a lot of friends who, some have been published, some have not. Some of their books are available at Ink Drinkers. I saw just yesterday when I was there. And if you write, you're a writer. It matters to you if you're published or you're self-published or whatever. That's a good thing. It's an encouraging thing. But writers are writers. So I just encourage people to write what they want to write things that they want to communicate. Start as young as you want to be, or as old as you want to be, or as you happen to be. I wrote some books back in the 2000s that I've never circulated, never tried to get people to publish or anything like that. And I came back to writing fiction in 2019 after I had taken a buyout. And I was, what would that be, 60 then? Something like that. So most of my fiction writing, the bulk of it has been since I've been in my 60s. So I don't think you can start too late. You can't start too early.
I love that. It's never too late. Yeah. Well, and as an artist, I do theater. It's the same. I feel like anyone who creates like that, it's just keep doing it. Mm. keep doing it, even if you feel like you're not doing your best or things like that. You get better with practice. You get better doing it. And I love that you said you don't have to be published to be a writer, because I'm a big believer in that. I love to journal. I write my own poetry and stuff, and that doesn't make me any less of a writer because it's not in a published book. So I love that you shared that.
If you write, you're a writer.
I love that. If you write, you're a writer. I love that. We need that like on shirts. If you write, you are a writer. So before we wrap up, is there anything else you would like to share with our listeners?
No, I live in Knoxville, Tennessee now, and it's really interesting to come back to Muncie and experience, I get to spend time with my son and family members here, and see familiar places and experience how awful the roads are. And so it's nice. We come back at least once or maybe twice a year.
That's great.
And it's really fun. Muncie, for having lived here all my life, is very much still a place that's familiar to me. And I don't know that I would rather live here than where I live now, but the whole idea that you kind of like you bloom where you're planted, and that I started writing instead of going to law school, started writing here, and it'll always be that place for me. So I'm glad to be here.
Oh, well, I love that. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to come talk to us. Again, his new book, That October, is out. It came out on June 1st. You can check it out at a local library. You can find it online at all the major retailers, though we encourage you to check out Ink Drinkers and All Yeah Comics. So again, my name's Gabby Sandefer, and thank you so much for listening to Pages and Partners, a podcast from Muncie Public Library. And in the meantime, keep reading.
This has been Pages and Partners, a Muncie Public Library podcast. For more information about library events and resources, visit munpl.org.